He's demanded political change and a boycott of the upcoming elections. But can former diplomat Mohammed el-Baradei transform Egypt into a genuine democracy, or does he risk plunging it into instability? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Shuli Ghosh. When he returned to Egypt in February after serving as chief of the UN's nuclear agency, Mohammed el-Baradei was given a hero's welcome. His call for true democracy has won him widespread support. With the help of the outlawed Muslim Brotherhood, he's gathered around 800,000 signatures in a campaign for constitutional reform. But now el-Baradei has gone a step further, demanding a boycott of the parliamentary election in November, saying it's certain to be rigged. Mohammed has more.
It was at a Ramadan iftar that Mohammed el-Baradei, surrounded by his supporters, demanded constitutional reform for Egypt. And this time, his tone was defiant, and the message was very clear. Change is on its way.
We still have a lot of other means. If the regime does not respond, then we have our legitimate right to demonstrating in public. And I hope we will not need to reach the level of civil disobedience.
He said civil disobedience will be the last resort, relying on the power of the street if the regime continues to ignore his calls for amending the constitution. But what does he want? El-Baradei is demanding the opportunity to allow independents to run for the country's highest office, with independent judicial and international supervision of elections, allowing people to vote using their national ID cards, and giving equal access to the media for all candidates. Demands that he had initially made back in December, but the regime has so far ignored. In recent weeks, el-Baradei has been at the center of a public scandal with the release of photos of his daughter in a swimsuit. His supporters claim this is a cheap and deliberate attempt to deprive him of much-needed support of the religious in Egypt. In fact, many speculate his newfound defiant tone is just a natural reaction of anger to this recent gossip centering around his family. Meanwhile, critics say whatever el-Baradei does, his efforts will be in vain. Analysts are predicting that President Hosni Mubarak has already decided on his successor, his son Gamal, who accompanied him on a recent trip to Washington. The Obama administration is under pressure to push Mubarak for political reform. But the truth is, the West needs stability and loyalty from their Arab partner in the Middle East in order to push their aims. Mohammed for Inside Story.
Well, let's introduce you to today's guests. In Cairo, we have Gamal Abdel Gawad. He's director of the Al-Haram Center for Strategic Studies. And in Washington, Jason Brownlee, the associate professor in the Department of Government at the University of Texas. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Gamal, let me start with you. Mohammed el-Baradei seems to be building up head of steam here in his campaign for change. Do you think he has enough influence to get a lot of voters to boycott the elections in November?
Well, I think it is very unlikely for the different political forces in Egypt to boycott the coming elections. Even many of the people or the groups who considered allies for el-Baradei, particularly the Muslim Brothers, still seeking participation in these elections. So I don't think so. So I believe that the recent rhetoric by Dr. el-Baradei is somewhat escalating in a sense, but without necessarily demonstrating that he's having a substance that would justify such a kind of escalation. So I'm afraid that he's creating expectations that can hardly be met.
Gamal, hasn't there been a growing clamour for change since 2005? And that's something el-Baradei is capitalising on.
Well, yeah, definitely. Egypt is changing. The call for the cause of reform is bringing more people to politics, is increasingly getting supported by bigger strata of the society. Yes, it began in 2004 with Kifaya and others. Some progress has achieved, but Now el-Baradei is making his own contribution. Definitely Dr. el-Baradei is instrumental in bringing more momentum to the cause of reform in Egypt. But whether he has reached the kind of critical mass that he can use to actually bring change the way he envisioning, I think this is something that I have doubt about.
Jason, what do you say about the kind of substance that el-Baradei brings to this debate for change? I mean, he came back into Egyptian political life. He seems to be galvanizing the public, but does he actually have the chops to provoke change?
Well, Shuli, on your first question about the boycott, I think there are two issues there, and Dr. Abdul Gawad referred to one of them. One is, will the opposition political parties or opposition political forces join in a boycott? And the second is, what will the attitude of the broader Egyptian public be toward a boycott? And I think on the first, it's very much an open question. It'll depend on each group involved. But on the second, one thing that we should note is that turnout in Egyptian elections recently has been pretty low in comparison to pretty much any country in Africa or Asia or other parts of the world. In 2005, the presidential election got about 7 million voters. That's in a country of about 80 million. So when we're talking about boycotts, we have to remember that for most Egyptians, it looks like they're not considering elections a worthwhile way to spend their time. And so I would say that when we get back to the question of what the National Coalition can accomplish, really its effect and its influence may be outside the electoral arena.
Okay, Jason, I just want to pick up on something that you mentioned there, the current political situation and voter apathy, if you like. Egypt has a population of 81 million people. Around 31 million were registered to vote in the last presidential elections of 2005. But of those, some estimates put the voter turnout as low as 15%. Now, under the Constitution, the current rules make it extremely difficult for opposition candidates to stand as president. At present, there are only 4 opposition parties with members in parliament. Even altogether, they've got less than 10% of the seats. And the largest opposition group, the Muslim Brotherhood, has been banned outright from standing as a party. Its members, though, have won 20% of seats as independent candidates. Jason, just picking up on what you were saying, do you think Egyptian people care about having more political freedom, or are they more concerned about improving their lives, improving jobs, social welfare?
Well, I think those two are linked in Egypt and in pretty much any country around the world.
Do the people know they're linked? So that's the question.
And well, I wouldn't interpret what you've termed apathy about elections as general political apathy. I think people have very major concerns that they're dealing with on a daily basis, providing for themselves and their families. And so it's not really apathetic, it's just that they have other ways that they're investing their time and energy. But about the elections in particular and who can contest them, in addition to the restrictions that you mentioned, according to the amendments that were passed in 2007, candidates are limited to those who are members of the executive councils, basically, of the parties, even the parties that have representation in parliament. So it's really, at this point, a very small number of people who can actually compete in presidential elections. Certainly it's more than one, which was the prior tradition in the system before the 2005 change, but it's still very limited.
Well, let me put that to Gamal. I mean, the ruling party, the NDP, would argue that they have brought about political reform, that they have changed things so that it's not simply a yes or no vote for one candidate, that they have opened it out. But realistically, as Jason's pointing out, very, very few people can be considered as candidates.
Well, according to the Constitution and the law, all parties, political parties that are represented in the parliament have the right to run in this election. The problem is always about the independent candidates, and I think this is a kind of a buzzword here, because we are not really talking about candidates, we're talking about the Muslim Brothers in particular. And Egypt, as well as I would say almost most Muslim societies, haven't been able yet to settle the question of the relationship between religion and the state, religion and public life. And this is the broader question, in fact, that we still need to be able to address, and Egypt hasn't able to address it yet. So the problem is there is always the concern that if the political arena is opened up in a kind of a rushed way without the prerequisite conditions for that, you end up in a kind of the Algerian scenario where you end up in a kind of a conflict that would consume the country for years. So I think we have to be careful here, and this is all what serious people who are at the same time wants to, while they want to reform the Egyptian political system, but at the same time they don't want to force the country into kind of chaos or instability. This is the real challenge that we are facing here.
Okay. At this point, let me bring in
Well, if I could just pick up on that.
Jason, just excuse me one moment, because we have been joined by our third guest, Mustafa Kamal El-Sayed, Professor of Political Science at the American University in Cairo. Good to have you with us, Mustafa. We're talking about the possibility of Egypt being forced into a state of instability and unrest because of this momentum for political change. El-Baradei has said that as a last resort there could be civil disobedience, that his supporters could take to the streets. What do you think of that, whether that is a serious threat?
It could be serious if some political action is taken. It's not enough to call for civil disobedience for people to follow. I think it is very important for el-Baradei supporters to join ranks with other groups of people in Egypt. Civil disobedience would be effective in Egypt if
but that's the difficulty, isn't it?
Workers.
Getting all the opposition groups and the small parties to work together. That's a problem in Egypt.
It is a challenge, in fact, to get all the political opposition groups to work together. The major problem is for secular opposition, the official opposition, to accept to work with the Muslim brothers. This has been a major difficulty, but I think civil disobedience could succeed, in fact, irrespective of the position by official opposition parties, because most of them don't have really a big popular following. The only opposition group that has serious popular following is the Muslim Brothers. And in fact, also political activism in Egypt has been manifested in actions by people who do not belong to political parties. The change that we see in Egypt since 2004 is due mostly to the activities of Kifaya and other groups that have sprung up, and they do not belong to official opposition parties. So I don't think the position by the legally recognized political parties is a very important determinant of the success or failure of a movement of civil disobedience. However, it is important to join ranks with workers, with government employees, and with business people, and this, I think, is a big challenge. And unless this challenge is overcome, the call for civil disobedience would not be very effective.
Do you agree with that, Jason?
Yeah, I do agree with the points that Mustafa has raised. I would say that, in a way, thinking about the challenge of putting all those groups together, that's often really the outcome. It's pretty far down the road when you're talking about basically movement building. If you think about movements in other countries that built up grassroots support and engaged in civil disobedience, certainly if they were kind of ticking off all of the different groups that they hope to work with at some point, and they put that as the precondition for their success initially, they would be very frustrated. But I think there are ways in which we can appreciate what el-Baradei's movement is doing, regardless of what other political forces in Egypt do. I think there are two questions there that need to be addressed. One is, what can they accomplish in conjunction with, let's say, the NDP, the National Democratic Party, if it cooperated with them, compromised with them, worked with them? And second, what can they accomplish on their own? Just being a popular movement that's trying to raise public awareness and educate the Egyptian people.
Well, what about political forces outside Egypt, Jason? What about, for example, the US? Many critics say that the US should be doing more to put pressure on Hosni Mubarak to have more political openness.
Well, I would absolutely agree with those who are not seeing the U.S. as supporting the pro kind of democratic forces in Egypt, and we have decades of diplomatic history that shows us that U.S. foreign policy tends to support the rulers they know over the kind of
well,
new
they
faces,
don't want to rock
new
the boat with
opposition
Hosni
movement.
Mubarak, do they? Because he's a very important ally to the West.
Pardon, can you say again?
They wouldn't want to rock the boat with Hosni Mubarak because he's a very important ally for the US.
Yeah, since the 1970s, the Egyptian government has provided a cornerstone of U.S. strategy in the Middle East, and certainly, as you say, they do not want to rock the boat.
Okay, nevertheless, the US Department has openly commented on the alleged fraud and voter exclusion of June's midterm Shura elections in Egypt. Middle East Democracy Programme official Tamara Kaufman-Witz said, "I'll be frank, we're concerned by what we've seen so far. Egyptian citizens alone should decide who will run in and ultimately win Egypt's elections." Gamal, do you think that the authorities in Egypt are sensitive to what outsiders like the US think?
Yeah, definitely no government likes to hear criticism coming from the outside world, particularly from an ally like the United States. But in the meantime, this administration has downscaled and downgraded its interest in domestic developments in Egypt. I believe that the experience of the past 10 years or so, the post-September 11 world, has been learned in the United States that there are limitations of what the United States can do. There are limitations of what kind of reform the Americans can bring, whether by using military means like they did in Iraq, and also by using political pressure and the means of pressure by using financial aid, etc. So this government is much more, this administration in the United States is much more realistic and much more keen about the mutual relation, or particularly, of course, the American relation in the Middle East, American interest in the Middle East, considering the fact that it is the United States and all the moderate governments in the region are facing major challenges manifested in the rise of radical forces. Here we're talking about perhaps states like Iran or non-state actors like Hezbollah, the Islamic organizations, Hamas, etc. So the region is really unstable, and the United States don't want to contribute to further instability. So working together is the name of the game now between the United States and its friends and allies in the Middle East. Within this, against this background, I wouldn't expect that the United States will be heavily involved in domestic politics in Egypt. On the other hand, let me get back to the issue of the civil disobedience. I don't see any signs of the protest and the demand for change in Egypt reaching a kind of a critical mass that would allow a leader like Mohammed el-Baradei to call for civil disobedience. This was not the first time for such a kind of call to be made. It has been made frequently over and over by political activists.
But there are some factors coming together here which are causing a lot of anger. For example, this apparent grooming of Gamal Mubarak as Hosni Mubarak's successor. That has caused a lot of criticism. Would you agree with that, Mustafa?
Yes, I definitely agree. I would like also to say that so far, Gamal Mubarak's campaign did not attract any important figure in Egypt. The person who is claiming to be heading this campaign is completely unknown to the Egyptian public. We have not seen any important journalist, political leader. You know,
but there has been this campaign where his poster's gone up all around Cairo, isn't that right?
Yeah, there are posters, everywhere, but we do not see, important opinion makers, coming to support his candidacy. In fact, we find the leaders of the National Opposition Party, they are quite reluctant to come to his support. They say that, the President Hosni Mubarak is the only candidate of the National Democratic Party, and by saying this, they express also their disapproval of the attempt to present Gamal Mubarak as possible successor. I think so far what happened in favor of Gamal Mubarak is to be considered discredit to him, liability, not an asset. I think he should draw conclusions from this.
I mean, why doesn't the NDP...
I'd like to follow up on this.
Go on, Gamal.
I'd like to follow up on this, please. Yeah, I believe there is no consensus on Gamal Mubarak as a candidate for the presidency within the NDP itself. All signs show that there are different views within the ruling party on this issue, and what we see now, it's not a kind of contestation between potential candidates. We see social forces at work. There are social forces within the party who think that Gamal Mubarak is their candidate for the coming presidential election, and other social forces, other activists in the party who represent other social forces see things differently. So it is, I think the issue of Gamal Mubarak, whether he is running for the office of the president or not, it is still within the party thing. It's much more serious within the party itself than it is in the broad Egyptian society.
Gamal, I mean, this whole issue of political change,
matter.
Wouldn't the NDP be wiser to diffuse the situation, the whole grounds that el-Baradei is campaigning on, by embracing some kind of political reform?
Well, if I get you right, because I have some noise on the sound here, but it is part of the competition, of the rivalry, of the different views within the NDP is about reform itself, is about the nature and the essence and the meaning of reform, and about the tempo and the pace of reform. This is something that is heatedly debated within the NDP itself, and what we see around from the different views expressed by party leaders and party cadres reflects that for a great extent. So it is, but things within the NDP apparently take different dynamics than what we see in this open arena of the society, where you have activists express their views in a certain way.
Yeah,
and we have to be able to...
We're running out of time. Let me just give one last word to Jason.
In the NDP.
Yeah.
Yes.
If I could just jump in here, I was in Egypt in the fall of 2007 when the ruling party had one of its conferences. And one of the reasons why so much attention focused on Gamal Mubarak as a likely successor was that the shakeup within the NDP's higher council, in terms of who got included, in combination with the amendment to the Constitution that says candidates have to be a member of a party's higher council for a full year before the presidential elections, it was the combination of those two changes that focused so much attention. Because if you look at the other people on that board, most of them don't seem like serious contenders.
OK, gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for a fascinating discussion. Mustafa Kamal El-Sayed, Gamal Abdel Gawad and Jason Brownlee. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you.
And thanks for watching this edition of Inside Story. If you want to comment on today's programme, email us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me, Shuli Ghosh. Bye-bye for now.